edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. And as you know, our motto is, from that great patriot, Benjamin Franklin, question authority. And you know what? I think Benjamin Franklin, beyond just being the statesman he was, but being the scientist that he was, look it up, most people aren't aware of that, he would really be saying that we need to question authority nowadays. And that's what our topic tonight's going to be. Well, it's going to be a little bit beyond that. It's going to be on the 5 most common methods used to promote mind control. Now, that conjures up things like zombies and someone taking absolute control over someone's mind in some sort of science fiction movie. And I want to get beyond that, okay? This is not the traditional even strap someone to a chair and totally erase their memories or condition them to go out and commit some sort of horrible crime. Because that's just the, if it even is possible, it's the extreme exception. Mind control takes place every single day in your life. It takes a variety of processes. And the thing is that if you're not aware of it, if you're not aware of how you are conditioned, molded, and basically formed into the product of your society, then there's no way that you can combat it. There's no way that you can think against it. It's just going to happen. You know, I'm reminded, that's the scene in the new Star Wars where the gal's sit in the chair and the bad guy's trying to get into her mind, but yet she's very powerful too, and she's able to push back. And that's what you're going to try. That's what you need to shoot for, is being able to push back and question in such a way that you just don't become, just one of the masses, one of the products. So I'm going to deal with the 5 most common methods of mind control. But before I get into that, just got to encourage people, check out my website. Got a lot of stuff written there about this subject at michaelcross.net, or you can check my YouTube station out at Michael Cross. And it'll be the one that'll pop up with the freedom from conscience reference. So anyway, let's get into this topic here. And again, before we start that, again, a little bit of delay, I want to quote someone here for you. His name was Bertrand Russell. And you probably have never heard of him any more than you've heard of Edward Bernays, unless you've studied it. I mean, they don't teach this kind of stuff in school, okay? The stuff I'm going to teach you goes beyond any of your psychology courses that you had in high school, or even the first year introductory psychology course you may have taken in university or in college. This is going to get into the more of the stuff that's more at the advanced level. So listen carefully. You might learn something, and it might open your eyes up to a lot of stuff going on, and maybe this could be something you want to share with people so that they also can see what's going on with them. So the first quote from Mr. Russell is, and this was several decades ago, I think the subject which will be of most importance politically is mass psychology. Its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Hey, by the way, propaganda is just persuasion, okay? Anyway, continued. Although this science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class, or the elite. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. So, essentially, what he's talking about in the future, maybe our day today, is the idea that basically the masses will get their type of psychology. Okay, the upper classes will know how to mold the ideas of the masses. Okay, so you can see this to a large degree in marketing and psychology, in which when you first start out, this kind of stuff's not talked about so much. But then the further you go along, you find out, whoa, you mean you can look at, just the color of something in an ad or the position of the model, and that will actually cause someone to buy something or it will grab their attention? Yeah, this kind of stuff is well known. Now, the thing is, you're probably thinking to yourself, and I know a lot of people do this, I'm not mind controlled. Come on. I am not a product of my society. I'm a free thinker. Okay? I don't even go to church. They're not going to brainwash me. But Edward Bernays, like I said, the founder of modern, basically marketing, and basically, a foundational figure when it comes to marketing psychology, said, those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our taste formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. And the thing is, if you don't understand how this works, then you're subject to it. If you know how it works, you're able to resist it, and you're able to, better help your children and grandchildren and friends and colleagues or congregation, fellow people in your congregation, if you go to church, to combat it. Okay? Now, you may think, oh, come on, who's this Bernays guy? He doesn't know everything. You could look up something very interesting to see just how far this guy has had influence on your life. Look up Edward Bernays and breakfast foods. Yeah, everyone just assumes that American society has eaten the same stuff for breakfast for years and years and years and years and years and years, way back to the Pilgrims. Not true. That's been something that's been fashioned. The position that some people do, the whole knife and fork thing in Europe, like your knife is here, your fork is there. That's all something that some king came up with as the way people should behave politely. And then it just gets accepted in the society. It's not because it's the best. It's just because of the way that most people just look around and say, well, this is just the way people do things. And then you think it's really funny if you see someone eating a pizza for breakfast. You eat pizza for breakfast? Well, the thing is, the person that should actually be laughing is the person eating the pizza, because at least they're breaking a social norm. They're not dictated to, I've got to eat this and this and this. And it goes beyond what you eat for breakfast. But, oh, by the way, on that breakfast thing, you might find it really funny. It's a little piece of trivia. Look up Kellogg and why he invented cornflakes. Go ahead. Kellogg, cornflakes, reason invented. You'll think it's pretty funny. Anyway, now what I'm going to be telling you now is something that most people are unaware of. Most people just go through their life and they just accept what is acceptable. Okay? They accept what is acceptable, not knowing where it came from. So, if you want to be one of the small percent that actually at least recognizes it, then please listen. Now, what I'd like to do is deal with the 5 basic, most popular methods of mind control / manipulation / get people to do what we want them to do. Okay? And the first one I want to deal with is guilt. Now, guilt, you're probably thinking, well, what's wrong with guilt? Got to feel it sometime. If I go out and cheat someone or I do something bad, maybe I should feel guilty. Maybe that'll keep me from doing it. All right? Well, I'm not trying to promote the idea that psychopaths have it right, but there are a few things we might be able to learn from psychopaths who don't feel very much guilt. In fact, they feel disappointment, or maybe not reaching a goal, or maybe they have a certain standard by which they live, and if they don't reach it, they're like, oh man, I didn't win this time. But they don't feel that like agonizing guilt. And guilt can basically be summed up as spanking yourself. Okay? It's spanking yourself. And the thing is that it's normal when a child is young, like toddler or younger, it looks upon the world as, the parents as being some sort of godlike figures that can do no wrong. Some sort of figures that what they say is truth. And so if you go against it, you're kind of going against God. Okay? And what happens is that creates a certain amount of mental distress and sadness when you do something wrong. All right. So this gets the child to start obeying the parents. But now, as time goes on, you learn that your parents are not perfect. But you still have those guilt feelings. Freud would have said it's part of the superego. It's the part saying, you shouldn't have done that. Well, see, that gets projected out. It gets something that society uses to give you guilt. Something that promotes that you should in some way feel remorse and change. And guilt is very, very, very effective. In fact, as a side note, when we talk about society having an impact on you, think about how society has changed just in the course of the last 55 years. In 1960, the average person believed that sex outside of marriage was wrong. It was something you should feel guilty about if you do it. In 1960, the average person believed, and by average, I mean the vast majority, believed that when you got, that a family was husband, wife, and about 3 or 4 kids. Okay? And if you decided not to have kids, then that would create guilt. Now, the thing is, that has changed radically in less than a lifetime, okay? That would be like if a person was born in 1960, they're like kind of a young middle age. And then, that is something that so much has changed. That used to be the rules for thousands of years. And in just a course of 2 generations or less, that's totally changed. To where now, people feel guilty for the opposite reasons. They feel guilty if they want to have a big family. They feel sometimes guilty for getting married because they're feeling like, oh, maybe this isn't the right decision. Maybe this is, and you're wondering, well, how did this change? Did it happen just overnight? Did people just suddenly realize, oh my gosh, my ancestors, my great-grandparents, great, they had it all wrong? Is that what happened? Was it organic? No, it was something that was conditioned. It was conditioned by the, education, the media. It was conditioned by even religion to a degree. Religion, up to 1960, even the more liberal Protestant congregations believed that you should get married and have a family. Okay? But now it's almost to the point that if you are a Christian and you have 2 kids, let's say you're married and have 2 kids and you're thinking of having number 3, people in your congregation are going to be saying, are you crazy? Why would you do that? So you see, religion has even been affected, and then it turns around and reinforces the new set of values, which to a large degree are built on guilt. And you know why I say that? If you're old enough to remember this, back in the early 1970s, oh my gosh, they had commercials that showed babies, and it would say, oh, this is the cause of what's going to happen wrong with the world, and don't have children, and we're all going to die. Talk about a guilt trip. I know a woman, she got involved in like pro-life stuff as her kids grew up, but she admitted to me that she had an abortion when she was pregnant with her 3rd child, because she felt so guilty about what that was going to do to the environment. All right? This is how strong this push was. Now, in those days, it was in your face. That was when the change was starting to take place. Feel guilty if you want to do this. Feel guilt. If you want to have a kid. Almost an apology. You have a baby. It's like, I'm sorry, world, I had a baby. I actually think there was a commercial that said that. I remember when I was a kid. But the thing is that after a while, it got ingrained in the society. It became institutionalized to where now I don't think you can pick up a high school biology textbook, in the United States at least, that will not contain a message on ecology, on growing human populations are threatening the animal's survival, and blah, blah, blah. And that is guilt. It makes you feel bad. Oh no, Bambi's going to die if I have a kid. Okay, the rhinos are going extinct because I'm going to get married and have children. Now you might think, oh, that's ridiculous. Come on. It's subconscious. Think about this. Just think about this. School valedictorian gets up, female. And think about what the reaction would be in a middle class or upper middle class community if she got up and said, you know what, I'm hoping to get married to my boyfriend who's serving in the military, let's say, when he gets off deployment, and we're going to start a big family. We're going to have a bunch of kids. Now think about the gasp in the audience. Think about the people looking at each other like, oh my gosh, what in the world did she just say? She could have said that back in 1960 and people would have been applauding, thinking, cool. Now it would be like, oh, that changed a lot because of social conditioning. And this guilt complex that's promoted in our society today is also used to tell you that if you don't accept like socialist policies when it comes to welfare and so forth, if you don't accept exactly what the more extreme part of the Democratic Party is saying, then you should feel bad. Look what you've got. You've got a car. You've got a home. And you're saying that you don't want to pay higher taxes? Now, some people be just like, well, hey, look, that's, I'm not going to even listen to this. But most people, it will affect them. It will affect them in the sense that they will feel a certain level of guilt. And even if they turn that TV set off, in which, those people on the news, they've been trained on how to even look into the camera and get a message across. Okay, they're television programs, TV sitcoms. Oh my gosh, talk about programming. And other, all of these things are well scripted. The colors you're going to use, the position of the person in the show. It's just like with advertising for cosmetics or clothing. Everything is done for a reason, including the message that gets across, which often is very subliminal. But anyway, you feel guilty because you say no. And then, you can think of a whole bunch of different issues that the left promotes, and they'll usually use guilt. How can you not do this? How can you feel good about yourself when this is happening in the world? Now, I'm not going to say that religion doesn't use guilt as well, but it's not done as scientifically advanced as when the left uses it. Okay, in religion, it's like, it can be powerful. God is feeling really bad right now that you did this. Okay, I get that. But it's usually on a personal level. It's usually on a level that's saying, okay, you shouldn't hurt someone, or you shouldn't, just fill in the blanks. It's more of a morals issue versus a socio-political sense of guilt. And why should you feel guilt about that? Because you've been told to feel guilty about it. And it's a very carefully crafted message. And also many advanced psychology techniques are used to get you to feel guilty for things you had absolutely nothing to do with. Okay? Absolutely nothing. No contribution whatsoever. In fact, you might have even been a victim of some of the stuff they talk about. But you're supposed to feel guilty anyway. So that's a big one. Recognize it, and you'll be able to combat it. I'm not saying that you should just totally get rid of guilt, but you know what? If I had a choice between raising children with a strong guilt complex or no guilt complex whatsoever, I would choose the latter. because at least they're not going to be as manipulated. And if you're talking about the way society is today, believe me, if you're trying to raise your kids religiously, the society is going to do everything it can to get you not to raise them religiously. So it'd be better that they were inoculated against society completely. Okay, now, the second one I'm going to deal with is base desires. And to a certain degree, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you ever heard of that, you look it up if you want. But essentially the idea is this. Our base desires are the things we really need. And if we don't have them, we're not going to care about anything else. So it's kind of like if you're drowning, you're not thinking about higher order reasoning or, the meaning of life at that very moment. Although if you keep drowning, you're going to find out the meaning of life pretty quick. But you're not going to be able to relate it back to the rest of us. The thing is that the base desires that are often manipulated in our society, and again, that's number 2, are such things as, and I'm going to go a little bit off on Maslow because he puts this a little higher, but, sexuality, survival, those kinds of things. Now, if you can structure messages in your society, whether, again, in education or in TV programming, to get people to feel that if they don't do something you want them to do, that those things are threatened, then you are, you're going to be able to manipulate people. I mean, on this thing with sexuality, it used to be, I remember there was these, in the war propaganda in like World War I, there was this idea that was promoted that women should in some way withhold themselves. I'm not saying that they were just giving themselves sexually, but it should be that, I would rather marry a man who served his country. I think that's actually what one of those posters said. I'd rather marry a man who served his country than stayed behind. And that goes back to some of the ancient tribes in Europe, certain Celtic tribes. When the men would go off to battle, the women would dance naked in the streets as they were going off. And the idea would be, if you go out there and win in battle and come back, and here's what you have as a treat. And this kinds of things are aimed also at women, obviously, that if you don't buy these products and do these kinds of things, then you're not going to get those things satisfied. You're never going to meet that Mr. Right. And you're never going to be able to succeed if you don't look a certain way and act a certain way and so forth. You won't get those basic needs satisfied. So essentially, those base desires, even though we call them base, it sounds kind of bad, but they're not. They're just survival things. And they can connect to such things as, the necessary building blocks in order to get your needs met. I know a lot of products have been sold using subliminals in this sort of thing. I remember that one of the examples I've talked about is cake mixes in the 1950s. They found that women weren't buying them, and they felt guilty. Going back to number 1, they felt guilty if they just threw water in and put it in the oven. There was no creativity involved. So they were told by a psychologist to add an egg, and that would, and subconsciously that would connect them to, like, providing an egg cell. The act of reproduction, which is what people, that's a base desire, is to make babies. And this would be like a sacrifice. And sure enough, you may think that's ridiculous, but guess what? When they put in the thing about add an egg, which wasn't necessary, sales skyrocketed. Okay? Just like when Bernays was commissioned with trying to get women to start smoking. So, you would get increases in sales amongst, the public. And he was told by a psychiatrist in New York that the cigarette could be a representation of the penis. and that if you sold things as a means of gaining freedom, power, and subconsciously the power that's usually associated with the phallic symbol, that people would buy it. Women would buy it. And sure enough, they did. They started buying cigarettes like crazy. Again, you might think, oh, this is insane. But you know what? The people that look at psychology, the people that are trying to program you to think and act in certain ways, they know it has an impact. Okay? They know it's going to cause people to behave differently. And it can be subtle, little pieces here and there. It doesn't have to be smacking you right in the face. And it will have an effect. Now, number 3, and this is a biggie nowadays, is fear. That's right. The power, I remember this documentary. You can look it up on the internet. It's called The Power of Nightmares, Part 3, dealing with the whole terrorism thing. Now, I'm not saying terrorism is not something to be fearful of, but your chances of dying in a terrorist attack are far less than slipping and dying by hitting your head in the shower. Your chance of dying in a terrorist attack are far less than getting in your car and driving someplace and not getting hit by a drunk driver. Okay? I mean, if you're constantly fearful, then, you're manipulatable. And that's what this documentary was pointing out. The Power of Nightmares, number 3, is that politicians have really started using fear to get you to do things like give up on your civil liberties. Let there be I will venture to say this. I was talking to someone who's going on a plane ride here in the near future. And, the thing that happened in Brussels recently, and he was really scared. And I just joke saying, one of these days they're going to have everyone just take all their clothes off and walk naked through the airport. And he was actually saying, I wish they would, because that would make it safer. And I'll venture to say, I don't care how, if they came out and said, we want everyone to go naked, walk at the airport, before, when they go in, I'll bet you the most religiously conservative fundamentalists and Mormons and so forth would be unbuttoning their blouses and wrapping their clothes in a nice, neat bundle and then walk into the airport. Okay? Because so many people are just scared, like, oh my gosh, I've got to do it because else, this is how you manipulate people. So even on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, security of body is one of the big ones. Employment, stuff like this. Scare people. Oh my gosh, the economy's in bad shape. Okay, I know conservatives point this out too. But if you're constantly telling, especially young people, that you better postpone getting married, having families, and stuff like that because you've got to be in a really good economic position, or you're not going to be able to make it, and you're going to get unemployed. You and your family are going to be out in the street. Okay, you promote this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden people aren't getting married anymore. And they're fearful, and they're you've got them not wanting to move out of their homes. But if you've got an agenda to reduce population, I mean, it's working pretty well. I mean, if you really think about it, economics is something that has always been something that you're never sure of. You could be a vice president of a firm somewhere back in the 1970s and still wind up getting fired because your company goes under or gets bought out. So the thing is, this fear thing is so powerful that you promote these ideas that if you don't do this, this will happen. Oh my gosh. And, you build the tension. All right. Watch on TV when they're talking about attacks and stuff like that, the tension that's increasing. And then you could go and sell them stuff. And, they've actually found in studies that people that are put into a high intensity, tense type of situation are more likely to buy products that then offer some sort of relief. And it could be just something like a relief from hemorrhoids or something like that. But it's like, oh my gosh, and I need this kind of vicarious relief because the world's coming to an end. Okay, and how many people are out there like, oh, the world's coming to an end? And that's one there you could actually say that, is related to number 3, and that's fear. Get people to, you're thinking, well, isn't base desires and, fear and playing on guilt all related? Yes, but fear ultimately, can run through all of this. And of course there's overlap, and this is what causes people to change their behavior. Fear of, if I don't buy this, the world's going to end. The next one related to this again. Okay, again, all these overlap is insecurity. You can create a distrust in people. I see this a lot. Look at our TV shows, soap operas, things like that. There's always this element of everyone's cheating on each other. Everyone is being mean. Religious leaders can't be trusted. This bugs me. I know there's plenty of religious leaders out there that do bad things. Obviously, they're people, okay? But if you watch TV and anytime you're going to bring on someone who's religious, you kind of know the plot. You know what's going to happen. All right? You know that things are going to, a little Skype breakup there. Anyway, think about how our society has been broken up because people have been propagandized to fear that they're going to be cheated on, or their religious leaders are in some way just manipulating them. We're creating a fragmented society in which the only person you're supposed to really trust is the government. You ever notice that? Yeah, you have a few exceptions. X-Files, Walking Dead, some of these kinds of shows which the government's not presented as a good thing ultimately. But the thing is that most programming, the government's there to save you. And you've got to be able to trust the government. Because you can't trust your husband, you can't trust your wife, you can't trust your minister or rabbi or pope or whatever. And so you've got to trust the government because it's always there for you. And in the movies, it always is, for the most part. And the distrust thing and so forth. Again, you don't trust large businesses. I mean, they've done polls that show that most people don't trust corporations. And the problem is with this is I can see when it comes to the big corporations that usually have connections to the government, which basically goes into oligopolies and so forth. But ultimately on TV, that's not usually the corporations that are the ones that are demonized. It's the smaller corporations and so forth. I'm just trying to think, is there ever how many times do you see business people portrayed as evil? Do they ever really portray the financial sector as being evil that much? That's an interesting thing to think about for a moment. But anyway, insecurity, and that'll cause you to, again, give up on your freedoms and accept things that you should not accept. And then finally, tribalism. Yes, tribalism. Ultimately, people break down, the politicians know this, that ultimately people break down into their various tribal components in voting and also the way they see each other. This can be, seen in the way that most people live around people that are like them. Most people go to church with people that are like them. Most people want to go to social events with people that share their views on those social events. And ultimately, when stuff's in the society, whether it's in, I think ultimately when you look at like our entertainment, but look at sports nowadays. Look how that's tribalistic. And then at the same time, how the government has encroached on that. The Pentagon paying for like these displays of flags and honoring the military and things like that. Look it up. Look up U.S. military sporting events and stuff. You'll see. And the thing is that is very valuable as a means by which you get people to identify. These, especially men, they go out, they go to this big sporting event, and it gets all patriotic, and it gets into some sort of, again, the first thing I think of when I see these events is you think of people like in these tribal settings, in maybe some very isolated tribes where they're all dancing around and getting ready to go to war or some sort of ritualistic event. We're no different. 60,000 middle-class white men sitting at a football game is no different than a group of people in some remote area of Africa doing some sort of ritual dance. It's no different. Okay? You can even say the cheerleaders have a certain level of connection to fertility and so forth. And, some of these, other aspects of sports nowadays, you're thinking, wow, it really is something that maybe not so much an African tribal thing, but maybe a Babylonian type of thing. But ultimately, tribalism is important. And going with the flow. And this idea that you should fit in, like I said earlier, go along to get along. That is very important in tribalism and getting people to accept the idea that they should become part of the group. And if they don't become part of the group, you're supposed to suspect them. They're supposed to suspect their motives and what they're up to. And so ultimately, then, yes, tribalism, flags, even now movies. You ever think of any movie that the United States military doesn't defeat the aliens? Okay. Oh, it's never the Chinese military. It's never the Russian military. It's never any other group like that. So there's a lot of stuff that goes in there to get people to accept the flow. Go along with the group and become one with the group ideal. So if we just review those, playing on guilt, connect to people's base desires, get them scared, fear, create insecurity, and tribalism. This can explain everything from selling cosmetics to having to have the right trendy clothes to people going to war or voting for candidates who believe in war or who believe or voting for candidates who support economic policies that will totally go against you, that might result in your company moving to, Mexico or Vietnam. But yet, oh yeah, I gotta be part of the group. I gotta do what the union says. I gotta do with what this group says. I've gotta do this because I'm part of this ethnic group and we are supposed to vote for this candidate. Okay? This is all part of mind control. You don't need to have someone sitting in a chair being hypnotized. It's way more effective when your TV show does it. It's more effective when your sports events. It's more effective when your education system. It's more effective when, everything you see at the mall is designed to keep you going with the flow. And as I said, to go along to get along. You go against this, as Nietzsche said, go against the tribe. It'll be lonely and fearful. But it's worth it. He did say it is actually ultimately worth it to be yourself. And, in today's society, if you do go along with the flow, it's going to be extinction. If you want to be a radical, maintain spiritual beliefs, get married, have a family, pass the genes along. That's what it is to be radical today. But to do that, you gotta recognize that you're not going to be going with the flow. Anyway, that's all I want to deal with today when it comes to mind control. What I would like to do is cut into a totally different subject than previously, and that is psychopaths and religion. But before I begin, I would encourage people to check out my website at michaelcross.net where I discuss this issue in more detail. What I'd like to make reference to is an article in the March 23rd issue of the Daily Mail. Well, basically it kind of starts off with the headline, if you're more atheist, you have a higher likelihood of being a psychopath. And then it goes into this kind of idea that psychopathy and religion might be associated with each other, whereas the idea of being religious might imply that it might at least imply that you might have a lower education level. So let's just kind of start off here with just the groundwork. The idea that being more religious is going to be associated with more empathy is, I think, the foundation of any kind of idea that psychopaths are in some way less likely to be religious. And, empathy is the idea that you're able to connect to someone by being able to, in some way, walk in their shoes. When you see someone that is happy, or you see someone that is sad or depressed, that makes you feel more happy or more sad and depressed. And in reality, I think most people do have a large level of empathy, that they can really feel for another person. Now, some people are way off the charts when it comes to empathy, and they're really, really, really connected to other people in that emotion. And other people on the opposite end are highly, what you could call more cognitive in the way that they see things. They think about things, but they don't necessarily feel about things. And that is actually one of the traits of a psychopath, is someone who some people call it cold empathy. Some people just say it's a lack of empathy. And the thing is, I suppose in that sense, if someone is truly thinking in those terms, one of the components that might attract them or anyone to religion could be this feeling of, well, having feelings. We all have seen these kind of church services where people will be crying as they walk up to an altar for, I guess, what they call altar calls. There are people that might be waving their hands in the air if it's a more fundamentalist church, and weeping as they pray or they sing a hymn. You can see this in even more traditional churches where people become very, very emotional during a church service. And, when they read scriptures or something, they can actually start crying. Now, the thing is, yes, that is a sign of someone being very empathetic. And so I guess there's this notion that if someone has a problem feeling those things, that they're going to be less likely to make a connection and therefore be less religious. And to be honest, that might be true. However, I think there's another component of religion that many people don't take into account, and that is the fact that sometimes being highly empathetic could lead you away from religion. On the other hand, being highly cognitive could actually make you stronger in a religion, and many times people who are psychopathic are religious. I have talked to people who are diagnosed as psychopaths, okay, or at least sociopaths. I don't make a difference between the two. Some people dispute that. You can look up one of my previous shows on YouTube in which I interview a research psychologist who makes it, we deal with the idea of a distinction between sociopaths and psychopaths, and he feels that there is no distinction. It's just a cultural terminology, really. So you can look that up. But anyway, the thing is, these kinds of people might be immune to one of the things that actually gets rid of a person's connection to religion, and that is when they read the Bible, they see all of these wars, they see these horrible punishments that come down from God on people when they're not believing or they're rebelling against God. They would read a story like Noah's flood and feel like, oh my gosh, how could a loving God do this? And that could tear them away from religion. Whereas someone who's psychopathic, who is thinking in the terms of more of in terms of psychology or biology or just the sense of a cause and effect, they might actually feel close to religion. They might feel like, yes, I believe in God, but I may not feel all these things that other people do, but it's a scientific concept. It's like, I don't know, if I was a psychopath, I could believe in Jupiter or Mars or Venus. That doesn't mean I have a relationship to Jupiter, Mars, or Venus on an emotional level, but they're there, okay? And a psychopath who is religious will feel exactly the same way. God is there. He's keeping tabs on what I do in life, and if I do good, I win the prize. If I do bad, then I wind up in a much less advantageous state in the next life. So this could explain why, and I did a previous show on the 10 occupations that attract psychopaths, and one of them is clergy. People that are part of the clergy are more likely to have higher levels of psychopathy. And when I say clergy, that doesn't mean any particular religion. It could be any branch of Christianity or Islam or Judaism. Okay? And maybe what it takes to study and understand religion to become part of the clergy would entail this idea of being able to separate yourself from those emotions and be able to understand deeper concepts of the religion. I'm just saying this, I'm not saying that all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, all the psychopaths out there are super religious and you can trust them and so forth. I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying that all psychopaths out there you can't trust, and that if they are religious, they must be phonies, because they're not. There could be maybe your minister or the lady that teaches your Sunday school or whatever could be psychopaths. Okay? They could be very moral and ethical people, but their idea of morality is going to be different than other people. Okay? Their idea of morality will be, whereas if a preacher gets up and gives a sermon to a group of youth, and one of the youth is a psychopath, and one of the youth is super highly empathetic, the preacher says, the Bible says thou shalt not fornicate, meaning, sex outside of marriage. And the psychopath may be sitting here going, oh, I can relate to that. I mean, I don't want to get someone pregnant and then be stuck in a relationship with them for the rest of my life. I don't want to catch a sexually transmitted disease. It would be advantageous for me to follow these rules in this sense. Then, whereas the highly empathetic person, well, let's say she's female and her boyfriend is feeling really bad and down that day, and suddenly she feels like, well, maybe I should give in. And, he's been pressuring me to have sex, so let's just do it. It'll make him feel better, and now make me feel better. But then after they have the sex, she is going to be feeling really guilty. She's going to be going, oh my gosh, how could I have done this? This is wrong. What will God think of me now? What would my parents think? Oh, this is horrible. And she could have two choices where to go there. She could either, try to repent and go and talk to her minister or bishop or rabbi or whatever and be saying, I did this and I feel really bad. What can I do to be loved by God again? Or she could go the opposite way. I talked to a woman who's actually been in relationships with other women, and she kind of gets a kick out of converting women to lesbianism. And she said the easiest ones to do that to are conservative women, because they get all emotional about what they have done, and then again, they can either go and repent, or two is they can start feeling like, well, maybe I should accept this new way of living. And then that gives them a sense of a relief, because now they can abandon their once conservative values and then go over to a new way of thinking. Now, so you see, someone commits a sin, then premarital sex, back to the male, female, in church, and the highly empathetic one can either, go through this sorrowful repentance, or she could just quit, just not do it anymore. Say, forget it, I can't handle this. It hurts too much. Whereas the other person who's psychopathic, let's say his girlfriend has been pressuring him, and she says, well, if we don't have sex, I'm just going to move on because I need to know if we're compatible in this area of life. So he goes ahead and thinks to himself, okay, well, cost-benefit analysis. If I have sex with her, I'm kind of going against my, what I have set as my goals in life, but I'll take the precautions and do it because I don't want to lose her because, maybe he really wants her in his life. And so they do it. And then afterwards, he rationalizes. He's like, you know what? I don't feel bad about this because I did not want to lose her in the relationship. I think God will understand and so forth. I kind of deal with this in my book series because the female in there is a psychopath and, she has relationships and these kind of issues come up. But in a cost-benefit analysis, the way a psychopath sees life, they would not be thinking, I'm such a horrible person. No, quite the contrary. They're rationalizing, saying, I did the right thing because I had not done this. I might have lost this relationship. And this gal is like beautiful. She'll have beautiful kids and let's say her dad's got a good, position in this one company. And, if nothing else, I'll get a job with his company and so forth. That is the way the psychopath would think. And so he's totally guiltless when he goes to church and he's sitting next to his friend who's sitting there weeping, in church. And he's like, well, what's wrong with her? But, he's going to be able to deal with it. Whereas she might actually fall away from religion in that sense. Now, I said I would deal with this whole thing about the, science and, our psychopaths who do think in this more cognitive way of looking at life. If they are going to, since they are more cognitive, they might fall away from religion because they're going to be more scientific, and we can kind of assume that they're going to be more likely to see the world in a secular way. Actually, it's not necessarily the case. I'll just quote just a couple of quotes here. One, Louis Pasteur. Look him up if you've, graduated from an American high school in the last few years. Anyway, Louis Pasteur, who stated, very, respected scientific researcher, a bit of science distances one from God, but much science nears one to him. The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the work of the Creator. And the guy that sent us to the moon, Werner von Braun, stated, science and religion are not antagonists. On the contrary, they are sisters. While science tries to learn more about the creation, religion tries to better understand the Creator. While through science, man tries to harness the force of nature around him, through religion, he tries to harness the force of nature within him. And finally, just one more thing that I was going to say is that ultimately, if you look at actually who's religious and who isn't in a society, you will find, and you can look this up through Gallup poll, just type in Gallup does more education equal less religion or something. And they did a poll that actually showed that if you have a postgraduate degree, you're 70% likely to be a member of a church. If you had high school or less, you're 64%. And when it comes to high school or less education, 43% had attended a church in the last 7 days, whereas postgraduate, 47%. So it kind of seems that religion and education are not necessarily antagonists to one another. But in the very general sense of how people see life and so forth, the idea is that if indeed psychopaths are, they're going to, a psychopath's going to be religious, then they will see God in a sense that will not be based on feelings and warm, fuzzy sensations and so forth. It's going to be dealing with issues of either their personal growth and connection to God, excuse me, or does it benefit society on the whole? The idea that there are some people that feel that if you got rid of religion, I think Napoleon said something to this effect, that religion keeps the masses from hanging the ruling classes. Okay? So you might look at life like that and just be, if you're a psychopath, and feel like, oh my gosh, we need religion in our society because we got to keep the people from rebelling. Now, this does not in any way, shape, or form determine the existence of God or lessen the existence of God. It's just the way a psychopath will see life overall. Now, the other thing I would throw in, though, about psychopaths is that a psychopath is, if they do get into religion, they are, as I said a little bit, remember how I said they tend to rationalize if they do something wrong. They are not going to beat themselves up over it, but rather they're going to start thinking in the terms of, well, I did it because it maybe made my girlfriend feel better to give in. Maybe it will strengthen the ability to get into a relationship with her and have family with her and so forth. That is the way they will rationalize everything. I mean, I've even heard of people, not necessarily just psychopaths either, who, their wife's, having really bad morning sickness, and then they go out and cheat on her thinking, wow, this is for her, because I don't want to bother her with sexual demands when she's not feeling good. That kind of rationalization. The other aspect, though, is you could wind up with someone who is able to manipulate. The bad ones are going to be more likely to be thinking about how to use religion to control people, cult leaders, I think, are often psychopaths, cerebral psychopaths, and they're able to play mind games on people and wind up, using religion to be able to exploit people and so forth. Now, that's not also to say that all psychopaths would do this. Again, it's going to depend on what that person's ethical way of seeing the world is. I would say, though, that at least they have the ability, because they would not, a religious psychopath is going to have the ability to be able to manipulate people, even using religion to do it, and feel zero guilt for doing so. Okay, maybe even rationalize, well, it's for their greater good. I'm going to enlighten this person, and so forth, or these people. Or they deserve what they get if they're so gullible to follow me. Okay, those are the ways that psychopaths think. So ultimately, in conclusion, I just encourage people to check up on these issues and stuff, because it's not just, there are politicians that get up and they're like, praise God and everything and vote for me. And that does not mean, just because they go to church every Sunday or Saturday or whatever, does not mean that they are not psychopathic. There's a very good chance that if they're really high up in politics, they probably at least score high on the psychopathic ratings. Not naming any names, just saying that probably is going to be the case. And so ultimately, it's interesting to know how the psychopathic mind is able to process religion as opposed to the empathetic mind. Anyway, take care, and hope you come back next week for another episode of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.